we have to speak to it. So we can look at that one. But yes, the issue of children and migrant workers and immigration, our statement is very clear. Policies which separate children and parents at the border are unethical and wrong. That's what the statement says. Don't do it. And because of that, the church speaks into that. Now, I'm sure we have folks who disagree upon immigration policy out there because that's a really thorny issue. But the church has taken a stance that, from our perspective, that relationship between parent and child is so central that to take that kind of an action is an unethical and unchristian one. So it's in those kinds of things that the church takes to meddling and gets involved. And that notion of, well, we want to be apolitical, being apolitical is not an option. Because everything involves our community and our social constitution. Right? So
the Methodists have more than just a statement. I mean,
yes,
they have a physical presence.
Physical presence, right?
To address issues.
All right. The preamble. We, the people called United Methodists, affirm our faith in God, our Creator and Father, in Jesus Christ, our Savior, and in the Holy Spirit, our guide and guard. We acknowledge our complete dependence upon God in birth, and in securing God's love. We affirm the goodness of life and confess our many sins against God. Of all that God has committed to us by God the Creator. We have been reluctant followers of Jesus and his mission to bring all persons into a community of love. Though called by the Holy Spirit to become new creatures in Christ, we have resisted the further call to become the people of God in our dealings with each other and the earth on which we live. All right? So, again, setting the stage. These are the parameters under which we operate. This is what our baptism requires of us as we think about our application and the way in which we live out our, as Wesley put it, practical divinity. The way in which we move on towards holiness, right? And so these are our guiding principles. We affirm our unity in Jesus Christ while acknowledging differences in applying our faith in different cultural contexts as we live out the gospel. We stand united in declaring our faith that God's grace is available to all and that nothing can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. Grateful for God's forgiving love in which we live and by which we are judged, and affirming our belief in the inestimable worth of each individual, we renew our commitment to become faithful witnesses to the gospel, not alone to the ends of the earth, but also to the depths of our common life and work. Okay? So that's the theological framework from which everything else flows. So as you're reading through sort of the natural world category, you take that and then you go back to the preamble and you say, okay, it's here that we have sort of set out the ideals by which we live and do our work. Okay? So having set that, well, I'm having trouble maneuvering. I don't know if you are. You
I'm
things slow? Okay, good.
I think we're okay now.
All right. The natural world. So go down there on the side. Okay, that's what I want you to see. The contents. So under specific stated category. So scroll through there if you would, Craig. So energy resources, animal life, global climate stewardship, space, science and technology. We have specific statements. So how many of them there are? 7 or 8 of them? Eight specific statements currently listed under this category. Why don't you scroll back up there and let's sort of, if we start with this premise that all creation is the Lord's, we are responsible for the ways in which we use and abuse it. Water, air, soil, minerals, energy, resources, plants, animal life, and space are to be valued. They belong to God, not to us. We're stewards. That's really an important premise here from which everything else falls. So scooting on down, economic, political, social, technological developments have increased our human numbers and lengthened and enriched our lives. However, these led to regeneration, dramatic extinction of species, massive human suffering, overpopulation, the list can continue. You know, we live with this all the time. What I want you to see is that the church says we speak into this. We have a responsibility to speak into this. It's not always clear exactly what we should do. And often we disagree upon exactly how to address the issue. Let's see. Go back. That's one I to look at for just a second. List. Go back to the list.
Okay.
Earth atmosphere, these greenhouse gas, dramatically the Earth's climate for generations to come, and sort of goes on from there. We therefore support efforts of all governments to require mandatory reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and call on individuals, congregations, businesses, industries, and communities to reduce their emissions. I mean, that's something that is stated quite explicitly here. Now, again, if you read through all of the social principles, you're going to find some that you don't feel particularly comfortable with or like. I certainly did in reading through. I didn't like that, and I suspect I liked or disliked some that I may have disliked some that you like. Right? That's part of how this goes. But goes back to that recognition that we will differ on issues, particularly when it comes to how do we address this. The question is not whether to address it. It is how to. And that calls for sitting around the table and working through it. It's not easy. As any have ever worked in a setting, whether it's in the corporate world or God help you in education, or the church, getting folks to sit around the table and come to a consensus on things is not an easy thing. And it's not any easier in the church, regardless of the fact that we're all baptized and ought to be following Christ. We're still human, and that works itself out in all kinds of ways. All right? So, statement here on the natural world. Any questions or comments?
It tells you to do it, but not how.
It does. It does. It says you need to do this and you need to be involved, and we need to pressure governments to be involved in addressing this issue, but it doesn't specify you need to follow this particular path. That's correct. Okay? Good. All right, let's go to the next one here. Great. Actually, let's directly to the economic one. All right. So, surveys of pastors tell us that very often folks in the congregation would rather they talk about sex in the pulpit than money. Money gets really complicated. We don't like to hear about that. We claim all economic systems to be under the judgment of God, no less than other facets of the created order. We recognize the responsibility of government to develop and implement sound fiscal and monetary policies that provide for the economic life of individuals and corporate entities that ensure full employment and adequate incomes with a minimum of inflation. We believe private and public economic enterprise are responsible for the social costs of doing business. Scoot on down. We further support efforts to revise tax structures and eliminate governmental support programs that now benefit the wealthy at the expense of other persons. Well, that's meddling.
Yeah.
That's meddling.
Sounds political.
It does sound political. Craig, go down to number 7. This is always a fun one. Gambling is a menace to society, deadly to the best interests of moral, social, economic, and spiritual life, destructive of good government, good stewardship, and an act of faith and concern. I'll tell you what, this is the one principle where the guns come out blazing. I'll tell you, I mean, a lot of the other ones, they kind of hem and haw just a little bit. We recognize, we encourage, not here. I mean, gambling is a menace, and this is really kind of interesting. So one of my favorite comments when folks will ask me about things, I say, well, what's going to happen at the General Conference? Or what's going to happen in the World Series? Right? I will often say, well, if I were a betting man and not a Methodist, it's often how I will respond. I said, well, I think as a Methodist. So Christians should have.
Derby time in Kentucky.
Yeah, Derby time in Kentucky, yeah. Christians should abstain from gambling and should strive to minister to those victimized by the practice. Where gambling has become addictive, the church will recognize such individuals to receive therapeutic assistance. The church acknowledges the dichotomy, and this is where it gets really interesting. Church acknowledges the dichotomy that can occur when opposing gambling while supporting American Indian tribal sovereignty and self-determination.
That includes.
How do you square those two, right?
Include bingo.
That's right.
Lottery.
The lottery, right? And we're going to get that here in just a second. So particularly on tribal sovereignty, here we're trying to support a marginalized group, a victimized group. One way they've been able to recover some economic prosperity is by building casinos. So now you've got these, yeah, what do we do with it? And that's where, I appreciate the statement saying, well, this one's a tough one. And we're not quite sure how to reconcile these two because they get too opposed. The church is prophetic undesirable to resort to commercial gambling, public lotteries, casino raffles, internet gambling, gambling with an emerging wireless technology and other games of chance as recreation, as an escape, or as a means of producing public revenue or funds for support of charities or government. What do we say? Where is the money supposed to go for the lottery in the state? Education. Education's a valuable thing. We've got other principles that assert the importance of education and providing appropriate funding for that. The lottery does that in this state, or at least it's supposed to, right? And here, we've got a statement that says, you shouldn't do that. So folks will ask about Methodists. I said, well, Methodists, we can do most anything except for gambling. Right? Except for gambling. However,
What about that church raffle?
and that church raffle we had scheduled for next Wednesday. That was going to be on yours. That was going to be, we probably should not. Okay?
Methodists do not have raffles at their bazaars.
We do not have raffles at our
They do
bazaars.
not
That's
have
correct.
rollback bands.
That's right.
Oops.
Now, if you want to sort of arm wrestle with someone over them, you can do that, but no raffles. Yeah,
Of course, this is being written for the entire world.
correct.
But I got to tell you a quick story. In 1992, they built the casino in Evansville, Indiana. And anyway, at annual conference, everybody stood up to vote against it. And I was sitting down, because I thought it was a good thing. I was serving in Henderson, Kentucky at the time. In the first year, I had 7 couples in my church divorce over gambling.
Mhm.
In the first year.
Wow.
Yep.
I feel like I was sadly mistaken.
I have a question.
Sure.
Now, what would happen if a Methodist wasn't supposed to gamble, and they won big money and they wanted to give it to our church?
They're on. Just don't ask any questions.
I had people do that, and I presented them with a pledge card.
Did you?
I have done that.
Yes. I don't think that's a hypothetical. I'm quite sure that's happened. I'm quite sure that's happened. Right.
Inheritance.
That's correct.
What if I get it as a Christmas gift, you know?
Yeah, I know. So, that's a great question. I mean, it really is. I mean, should the church accept that money, right? Well, I would guess in most cases, the church says, well, yeah, we'll do it. Go, go say 3 Hail Marys, come back. And we'll do it, right? Yes.
Horse track, we have, as part of the Bourbon Trail.
Yeah.
The liquor industry wanted to give to the Methodist Home for Children.
So how'd that go? Steve?
Well, if we did, we could, because the social principles say that we should, under the economic
Right.
from organizations, we
Couldn't accept it.
We
Yeah.
didn't take it.
In higher ed, have someone who wants to come and give a gift to college, to a program, whatever. And very often they have strings attached to it that might have a political statement one way or another. Or, in some cases, like this, it comes from a source that may be a bit problematic. And colleges and universities, and I know of many instances where someone has offered to write a check and ultimately they had to say no, right? So, I mean, you're right, Steve, and this is a good example of where the rubber meets the road, where consequences, and some are just a little bit, right? They're difficult. Good.
Well, what about the good that it does?
Yeah.
Does that not offset some of the other?
Well, that's part of that's the struggle, right? Because in fact, there is that notion this money is going to education, which is good, but we ought not. So, yeah, this is where it gets difficult, right? Craig, let's drop down quickly and let's look at the political community real quick.
Yeehaw.
Yeah. All right.
Hold on a second.
All right. So we hold governments responsible. Get some better technology. While allegiance to God takes precedence over our allegiance to any state. That's a really important statement. While our allegiance to God takes precedence over our allegiance to any state, we acknowledge the vital function of government as a principal vehicle for ordering society, because we know ourselves to be responsible to God for social and political life. We declare the following relative to governments. And you've got our listings here. So we've got basic freedoms and human rights, political responsibility, church and state relations, freedom of information, education, civil disobedience, the death penalty, criminal justice and restorative justice, military service. One of my favorite Methodist writers is Bishop Will. And about he was pastoring, he had a gentleman who was preparing to join the church. And the man was retired military. I think he'd been a colonel, so he'd done quite well. I just found thinking joining church. The Methodist Church opposes the draft. And Will said, well, yeah, that is true. That's in the principles. Under military service, we do not support a universal military draft. We think that violates conscience and ought not to be done. What I'd encourage you to do, he said, is I want to give you a copy of the social principles. I'd like for you to read them. And then come back and we'll talk about it. And the guy agreed to do it. So a couple of weeks later, he came back, he sat down, he said, I read through those as you told me to. He says, I don't like a lot of them. I really don't like them.
Hey, Larry, when you say they oppose the draft, did
Yes,
they
sir.
go on and explain an alternative?
And we can look at it here in just a second. We can look at what it says there about that. But his comment was, a lot of things in there I don't like, but I'm going to join the church because I want to belong to a church that cares enough to get involved and to stir things up. A church I want to belong to, not one that's irrelevant. And so the guy did. Now, I'm sure he still wasn't happy with the statement about military service, but he recognized that. Okay, so war and urge the peaceful settlement of all disputes. From the beginning, the Christian conscience has struggled with the harsh realities of violence and wars. We yearn for the day when there'll be no more war. Some of us believe that war and other acts of violence are never. We also acknowledge that believe that when peaceful alternatives have failed, that force of arms may regretfully be preferred to unchecked aggression, tyranny, and genocide. Hence that tension. Our goal is peace. Christians have a long tradition of pacifism going back to the earliest Christians who refused to serve in Caesar's armies. And we also have a long tradition of Christians who are thrust into positions of cannot protect the innocent. Arms, how do you square that circle? Not easily. I'm reminded of one of my favorite statements from Martin Luther, and he was addressing this particular issue of what a Christian ruler called to act and to love like Christ was supposed to do when faced with aggression and the need to defend his realm. What should a Christian prince do? And Martin Luther said, sin boldly.
Said what?
Now that's not something for everybody. I had that one in my office. Students would always come in and they kind of puzzle over it, which was a great opportunity to teach, right? But sin boldly, and his point was, very often we are presented with dilemmas and paradoxes for which there is no easy answer. We do the best we can at the moment to make the right decision in the fear of God, and we trust God's grace to cover it, because that's all we can do. Military service is one of those. And I appreciate the fact that the church takes a very strong statement that we are on the side of peace. Scoot on down to, we reject the policies of enforced military service draft as incompatible with the gospel. Why? Because we acknowledge governments, we urge as they reach conscientious decision concerning the nature of their responsibility as citizens. Right? That puts people in a very difficult position to have to choose whether to be a faithful citizen or to be faithful to Christ as they understand it. And so the opposition to the universal draft, right, is part of our statement. At the same time, the church recognizes how fraught it is in the living of it.
York sinned boldly.
He sinned boldly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
We sinned boldly at the Holocaust.
We sin boldly. Yep. Yep. Good. Okay, Craig, let's go back. And since we're getting close on time, let's get to the one where everybody wants to look at it. And we're going to look at the nurturing community for a minute. All right. So, let's just go to scroll through all of the topics that are listed there. There we go. There, contents. Okay. Look at all of the statements that follow under this particular category. Do you want to know what the church has to say about marriage and divorce? Right here. Okay. You want to know what the church has to say about singlehood? You want to know what it has to say about human sexuality, which we're going to look at in a minute? Family violence and abuse. Remember, I told you we're getting to meddling here. Sexual harassment, abortion. You want to know what the United Methodist position on abortion is? I really encourage you to go look at it. I will tell you this from my perspective. This is one reason, again, why I'm a Methodist. I find this to be one of the best statements about one of the most difficult struggles in human existence. And it's not easy. And I appreciate the way in which the church has gone about wrestling with that very difficult problem. If you want a very strident pro-life position, you won't find it here. But if you want a position that says, how do we think about this and work through this and support people going through this and support the life of the infant, how do we do that? Got a great statement right here. You may not agree with it, but I promise you, you won't go away not being able to think about it. It's a really strong statement. The faithful care for dying persons, pornography, bullying. These are all things addressed by your church, our church. These are not things we can ignore. These are things we address. All right, Craig, why don't you go up and number 7. Yeah. All right. So this is the one that is become the most thorny issue for the church over the past 2-3 decades. We affirm that sexuality is God's gift to all persons, and we call everyone to responsible stewardship of this sacred gift. Although all persons are sexual beings, whether or not they are married, sexual relations are affirmed, listen to the language that's used, only with the covenant, within the covenant of monogamous heterosexual marriage. That's the language that's in there. That's what we affirm. It doesn't say throw people out who don't abide by this. It says, if you want to know what we think about this, this is what we affirm as the ideal. Of commercialization, abuse, and to the pornography section. We call for strict enforcement of laws prohibiting sexual exploitation of children and for adequate protection. All persons marital status or sexual orientation, civil rights ensured and be protected against violence. The church should support the family in providing age-appropriate education regarding sexuality to children, youth, and adults. Craig, I'm gonna let you teach that lesson.
How old is that those statements? How old are
Oh,
they?
that's from 2016. That's from the last general conference. So this is what,
Who did, when you keep talking about they,
yes,
who are they?
the they is the general conference. So someone has an idea. They say, could be your Sunday school class, says, we need a statement about of runaway dogs. We think this is really important. Your Sunday school class can develop that idea and actually submit a proposal, which goes to which body? What is that, Craig?
I don't recall. It's a legislative.
It's a legislative body.
It's one of the legislative.
There is a process by which you, any person, any member of the United Methodist Church can submit something. It goes to this body, they read through it, and then they will forward it on to the general conference, either with, yeah, we think this is a really good idea, or no, this is really silly. We don't need a statement about clowns, right? So we don't need to put that in. But care of animals, yeah, we'll do that. Or they might say, we affirm this, but we suggest some altered language. And then it will go to the floor of the general conference to be voted upon. So when I say,
That general conference, the members somewhere appoint them.
yes, and we're going to talk about that in the next couple of weeks. So we'll talk about exactly how that happens. All right? So we affirm all persons are of sacred worth, created in the image of God. All persons need the ministry of the church in their struggles, as well as spiritual and emotional care of a fellowship that enables reconciling relationships with God, others, and self. United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. We affirm that God's grace is available to all. We will seek to live together in Christian community, welcoming, forgiving, and loving one another as Christ has loved and accepted us. We implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be in ministry for and with all persons. That's the current language in the social principles with regard to homosexuality. Okay? Of course, what we have beyond that, Craig, and this will require you to sort of copy and paste Judicial Council Decision 702. Yeah. And then see if you can get there.
Search it.
You can do it in the UMC website. Just go up to, okay, that's fine. Yeah, that's it. All right. So, all right. So, let me read to you.
That's it.
Yes. I think that's it. Okay. All right. So here's where things get a little sticky, shall we say. All right. I wanted to read to you from the decision. I'm not able to get to it right away, but I can provide it, or we can provide it to you. Basically, it lines out the process by which persons who are in violation of this statement can be brought, the whole process lined out for how this to happen. They're brought up on charges, and then it goes to the bishop, and then the bishop attempts to remedy. If that doesn't work, then a kind of, what do you call the phrase? What's the phrase? It's a mediation of sorts.
What's that phrase?
Really seek reconciliation.
Seek reconciliation.
Yep.
If that fails, then a church trial.
That's church trial.
Then a church trial. Who have
Forwarding.
a variety of things, who have participated in solemnizing a same-sex marriage, who are themselves a practicing homosexual. There's 3 or 4. I mean, you sort of list them. And it indicates the process. What's really interesting in the statement, it says the same thing about any member. Any member who violates the principles can be brought up on charges and brought to a trial in front of the church. So when we talk about the fact that some clergy or some bishops have or have not violated the principles, that also applies not just to clergy, but to all of us.
What are
Right?
the consequences of a member brought up for charges and so forth? What are the ultimate consequences?
Would be disaffiliation
Removed
from the
from
church,
church.
from the
Yeah.
church rolls. That's correct. That's correct. Okay.
I thought we had open doors.
Well, we do. And part of what I want you to see here is that this statement does not say that a person who is homosexual cannot they are full members, which they have been from the beginning of time. And we're not talking about other about our friends, we're talking about people we work with, we're talking about people we worship with. So where things have gotten really dicey over the past 8 years is the idea that this language may be changed and softened. To change this language, which will remove language indicating that clergy cannot solemnize a same-sex marriage, or that they cannot be ordained if they are a practicing homosexual. That is what is at debate, and how much and how the church should address violations. The church has addressed violations. It's also, in some cases, turned a blind eye and not done it in other cases. That's absolutely the case. So the question is, how do we wrestle with this? And again, part of what I wanted to sort of give us with last week up to today is that we've been arguing over this for a very long time. This is not new. The question of what's going to happen at General Conference. Well, if I were a gambling man and not a Methodist, my guess is, well, I know for sure there will be legislation brought to the floor to change this language and to soften it. Whether it passes and in what form is anybody's guess at this point. Folks who have left the United Methodist Church and gone either on their own or to a global Methodist church have affirmed that they do not want this language changed. And so in their guidelines, their version of the of church law, they're maintaining this language. They don't want this language changed, and they were afraid that it was going to change, and so they preemptively left, and they've established a church where that's not going to happen, right? But we don't know how this is going to resolve. which I'm of course not, is some compromise will come out of this, as Methodists are wont to do. We'll have to see. I don't know how it's going to resolve. But the language has gone back and forth. This language was not in the Book of Discipline or the Social Principles until 1996. Is relatively new.
Has been intensified since, what, the early 70s?
Yes, yeah,
Of that nature?
absolutely.
Over that range?
When
Yeah.
is the next conference? When,
April.
April.
23rd.
this year?
This year,
And it's the first time since 16?
since 16, because of the pandemic.
Is it true that the black congregation homosexuals to death?
I don't think that's the case for members of the Methodist Church in Africa. Is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
But there certainly are in some of the African nations in which they reside, there are laws that have the death penalty capital punishment for homosexuality. Yes.
But it's not the Methodist group. I mean,
Well, that's a law. It's not from the church.
What would Jesus do?
I love you.